Back in the day, there were a lot of video games that utilize the concept of a silent protagonist, to where oftentimes you'd play as this cool hero who'd go out and save the world, and by making the character that you play as be mute and only ever really have the options for yes or no without any actual extended amounts of dialogue, it was a way to make players feel more connected to the character that they were playing as and allow you to project yourself onto this cool hero. Visual novels kind of use this idea as well. Visual novels, I feel like, rather than using the silent protagonist in most cases, would actually utilize the thought of a faceless protagonist. And that would be oftentimes used maybe in a way to where you just have the bangs of the character's hair covering over their eyes. So that way you couldn't directly look into the person that you're playing as. Oftentimes in a visual novel, you probably aren't going to be seeing the face of the protagonist anyway, outside of maybe within CGs, but it's kind of done in a way similar to the silent protagonist, to where you want to be able to have this kind of outlet for letting the player resonate and feel maybe more connected, and in some ways project themselves onto the protagonist within the visual novel story. And today I wanted to talk about a couple examples of maybe not only the faceless protagonist, but also in a case of how you could utilize the idea of a silent protagonist and make it to where you could have a little bit of more of that connectivity within the player into the protagonist, and that you could feel more connected to the story through the implementation of a silent or faceless protagonist. So let's get into it. Recently, I have been reading a visual novel by the name of Doko Iku, which is a non-translated visual novel that feels very emotionally gripping. The tone of the story leans closer to that darker side of things. And the protagonist is one of those generic stereotypical faceless protagonists where they just have hair covering their eyes, and you can see the mouth and the nose, but you can't ever see the eyes. I would say that having a faceless protagonist in this game doesn't really matter, but recently, in the most recent route that I finished for this title, Doko Iku, to summarize the build-up into this moment that I'm going to be talking about, we have a scenario where within the story of Doko Iku, there is this drug epidemic that is sweeping through the town. And as you play through the story, you realize this drug is a pill that people can take while it puts you into a dreamlike state. It essentially kills the person in a way. Your mind gets sent into the past, into where you can merge the memories and the mind of the past you and overlap over that past you with your current present state of mind. And in one of these dream scenarios, the player character meets the older brother for the main girl of the route that you are currently on. And the older brother is also utilizing this drug in order to go back in time, and decides to kill the main girl of the route, because there are certain laws and restrictions upon what you can actually do while in the past, and how that would overwrite history. So considering that the older brother doesn't consider killing his sister to be something that would actually be written down as a permanent overwrite into history, he does it to test these boundaries of what he could do as far as time travel. And the protagonist, angered by the actions of the older brother, tells him to kill himself. And in a moment of quick realization that, wait, he doesn't actually mean that, the older brother walks away. And upon waking up from our dreamlike state the following morning, we end up coming to realize that yes, the older brother did end up killing himself in the past, and that was something that ended up actually overriding history. And so a scene that follows later that day, where the protagonist is talking to the main girl of this route, we have a CG where you can actually see the concept of the faceless protagonist at play here. You could say that it's not too emotionally impacting, but I almost feel like this CG in particular is pretty well weighted in the fact that you can see the heroine kind of in this distraught state where they're venting out their emotions to the player character. Off to the very far side of the screen, get to see the player character almost just, I guess you could say, staring. But in this moment, I feel through the use of the faceless protagonist, you are able to kind of feel these emotions, the inner turmoil of what did I do as a player, to where you get to feel, oh, I feel really bad because you told the older brother for the girl of this route to kill himself. And so while within the CG that we're looking at, you don't necessarily need to like show a whole bunch of heavy emotions on the player character's face, because you as the player of the story are actually feeling like you are projecting your emotions onto the main protagonist of the story, and you yourself are actually feeling all of the emotions that you would have in that moment. Another example that I have is from yet another non-transitive visual novel, Mizuhiro. We actually can't look at the remake version of Mizuhiro because of the way that they ended up cropping CGs in order to make the CGs fit for an HD screen ratio. Looking at the original Mizuhiro, there is a bit in one of the routes to where the main girl of the route that you are on is this sort of like ghost. They were a childhood friend that ended up moving away one day back many years ago, and in the current state of like the story, they are appearing every night through like the player character's wardrobe as this sort of like non-tangible being, to where only the protagonist can see her and everyone else she is invisible to. And so as the story progresses and the main girl of this route wants to like go outside, they end up realizing that because she shows up every night in the same clothes that she wore when she was a kid, that she's barefoot and that she can't really go outside while wearing shoes. Otherwise, people would just start to see a walking pair of shoes with no person attached to it. So it ends up being this like very minor like drama. But as the story progresses and we start to realize that this girl might not show up anymore, the protagonist takes her out on a date to an amusement park, and in order to circumvent the fact that she can't wear shoes outdoors, he ends up just carrying her the whole way around town. And we get a CG to where, with the events that follow as well, it feels very emotional because you can see the protagonist in that stereotypical faceless protagonist look. You kind of get the same feeling as Doko Iku, because as the story progresses and the protagonist ends up just looking like this total whack job, where he's going around, he's carrying this person, so to people that actually can't see this person, he just has his arms in this like really weird pose. And then also when they go around and do things such as like going on rides, and then later on going into like a restaurant and ordering stuff for like two people rather than for the singular person that people can actually physically see in the CG, where we actually are seeing the main protagonist, it kind of has that feeling of like, whoa, you can kind of feel that like inner turmoil of like somebody that has steeled themselves and has prepared themselves to make themselves out like an idiot in front of tons and tons of other people in order to like make the girl that he's with happy. Another example that I would say is closer to that idea of a silent protagonist that a lot of video games utilize is Little Busters. I would say that throughout a lot of the time in Little Busters, the main protagonist isn't actually voiced. They have a lot of dialogue, but there isn't actually any voice acting. And throughout like your 40 to 50 hours leading up to this point in Little Busters, there are very few moments where you're actually going to see the face of the protagonist. And as you get deeper and deeper into the story of Little Busters, there is going to be a point where you actually do switch perspectives. And in doing that, you have a scene to where the character that you are now currently in like their perspective is in this like weakened emotional state where you feel like you can't really move on and keep going with the things that you are currently set out to do, what you need to get done. And you get to have finally a moment where the main character of the story, the protagonist, shows before the person that you're currently in the perspective of, and is this like beacon of light. They finally have voice acting, and you get to see a full character sprite for the protagonist that you have not seen throughout the like 40 or 50 hours that you've been playing through Little Busters. And I think in that moment, what's weird is that the protagonist of Little Busters is not really that like cool hero. A lot of characters describe them as being very feminine. They have a bit of a higher pitched voice. They're not really somebody that invokes a sense of like power. They're small in stature and come off as being a pretty weak person. But in that moment, you actually get to kind of feel this moment of like, whoa, this guy is nowhere near the embodiment of a strong hero that's going to come and save the story. But being in the perspective of this other character, you get to see the protagonist in a different light and think, whoa, that's me? And you get to think he's cool and he is like the hero. Now, one final example that I think is probably one of like the biggest examples of like a modern faceless protagonist and how exactly it could be done in like a really well fleshed out way which is the character of Sensei within Blue Archive. Within Blue Archive, you have the character of Sensei, and I almost feel like by having the story be a live service game, you have way more like time to flesh out and show the protagonist within various different kinds of scenarios throughout the main story, and also within the various amounts of events that happen as the years go on and on and on. And I think specifically within Gacha, it doesn't even have to be Blue Archive. You could look at something like Fate Grand Order as well. The main character is who every single player is experiencing the story through for like so many countless hours across even like multiple years. So people become quite attached to their main character and are allowed to kind of project. And I think in Fate Grand Order, considering that you actually do get to see the protagonist's face, it's maybe a little lessened. I do think the idea of Sensei and the fact that like there is no official canon face for Sensei really like works well. People are able to project themselves, and through like the different dialogue options within the game, you can decide who is like the Sensei that you are. I think outside of the game, you have a whole bunch of like different fan doujin work stuff, and you can look at different artists and how a lot of artists will have different faces for the Sensei. But as far as like the official canon face with a quote unquote doodle Sensei and how it's just like a drawing, there is no official look at Sensei's face. But through like within the game, you have all of the various different dialogue options. So you could be like, oh, well, I maybe feel more connected to the serious side of Sensei and how he does his best to try and lead his students onto like a correct path in life and be like to better themselves and become strong without needing to rely off of other people. But maybe in this other case, oh, I relate more to the Sensei that's a little bit flirty and will joke around with his students in a way that can maybe feel romantic, but at the same time is maybe not. And maybe I am the degenerate Sensei, where you decide to, you know, go full send on Sensei and how he can be a little bit crazy when it comes to licking the feet of maybe some of his students, right? I think the idea of within Blue Archive and fully utilizing the idea of a faceless protagonist to where I think maybe because of its live service and because of the extended period of time that countless dozens and like hundreds of thousands of people are able to play this game from the ease of their smartphone, and you get like a wider range of players and how every single player is able to take something different away from the protagonist by the fact of this protagonist isn't this like set character. It is somebody that is moldable to whoever the player is, and the player is able to kind of feel different things about the protagonist of Blue Archive. But yeah, those are a couple different examples I had in mind for the idea of maybe the faceless or the silent protagonist, and how visual novels take the concept of the silent protagonist from a lot of video games and mold it and utilize it in a similar fashion within their stories as well. I've been Wave. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.